Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, ships at sea, elephants in the jungle, this is this week's episode of Property of the Week with PropertyLens. For those of you who don't know, by now, my name is Bob Frady, the CEO and co-founder of PropertyLens. With me, as always,
John Sigman, president and co-founder of PropertyLens.
John, today we have a very special guest, a longtime friend of Bob and John, who has set the insurance world on its ear by producing replacement cost estimates that are the best in the industry, as far as I'm concerned. So welcome Todd Rissel from E to Value. Todd, why don't you give us a little intro about yourself?
Sure. I can't really top that, but that's awesome. Thank you, Bob. My partner and I started E2 Value 25 years ago because we felt we could build a better way to value structures in the USA. And we're doing that every day now. And we met you fine gentlemen along the way in our journey. And so we do things from little cabins in the woods to huge commercial structures and everything in between. Now, today, we include Canada and have for the past 10 years. So we go from, I'm not sure if it's still called Mexico, but the Mexico-USA border all the way up to the Arctic Circle.
All right. Well, full disclosure, Todd and his company are partners of us at PropertyLens. We happily display their data inside of our reports. And what we do on Property of the Week is we have one of our friends send us a property, we take a look at it, and then we see, we right, we wrong, what do we see in the property? Normally what happens when you come to PropertyLens, you type in an address, and then you get a whole bunch of stuff that walks you through a purchase funnel. We're going to skip all that exciting part for now. We're just going to get right to the meat and potatoes, which is the report itself. So the address that you gave to us, Todd, was 15C Road in Rye, New Hampshire.
Well, I thought it was a good address to look at because I have lived in the area. I live near there. And if I was putting myself in the shoes of a buyer, and on the outside it looks pretty good. It's built in the 90s, which for New Hampshire is pretty new. It's right by the ocean. It's by a beach. It's by a country club. So it looks very attractive from the outside.
So what we do at PropertyLens is think of it as like a beehive. We send out hundreds of bees. They go bring back the powder, and then we turn it into honey in our platform. We use a combination of rules. We use a lot of AI to see exactly what we can see about a property. But data is confusing to a lot of people. So what we do is we try to give you a series of questions that you should ask if you were considering buying this lovely home in Rye, New Hampshire. And John, why don't you kick us off?
All right. So in the buyer lens, we see that it's subject to wind, 65 miles per hour or greater, damaging winds. It's had 3 within the last 3 years, or excuse me, 5 within the last 3 years. And, we want to check for things that are associated with wind. So shingles, cracks, all damaged siding, all that stuff that's associated with it. Roof seems to be in great shape. Because we probably could not find any permits, we're estimating it to be at 26 years old. So it would be at the end of its life. But the fact that it's in great shape means that something's been done probably along the way. So there's a lot of questions about the roof because if you move in and then all of a sudden you have leaks, to replace the roof is about $27,000. That would be a totally unexpected expense. So you'd want to figure out, hey, did this roof get replaced? Was it not permitted? What went on?
As you can see, the property is 26 years old and the roof is 26 years old. So it looks like an original roof. We don't have anything to indicate that it's not.
It's in a place that gets cold and then gets warm and then gets cold again. So frozen pipes, ice dams, both of those can be very unusual. And in fact, if the roof has been relatively new, since it is in great shape, one of the reasons that they may have replaced the roof is because of ice dams. There'd be a lot of questions that you'd want to ask around that.
John, why don't you tell our friends at home what exactly is an ice dam?
Oh, an ice dam is when the snow on your roof melts and then it freezes, turns to ice, typically along your eaves, And then it does it again, except that because there's ice there, it doesn't melt as quickly as the snow. The melting snow further up on your roof causes the water to go down the roof. The ice blocks its way, essentially damming it, and then it flows backwards up under the shingles and into your house, causing a rainstorm inside your house.
One of the most miserable claims ever, because it's cold when it happens. It doesn't happen when it's 80 degrees outside. It happens when it's -8 degrees outside.
It's near the ocean, so you got lots of humidity. Lots of humidity turns to mold, especially getting the right temperature ranges. Not in the, it's got a higher than average little bit of crime going on. Fairly variable thing because the crime scores are updated every year based upon the data available. So you could have just a bad year cause following year to look bad on a place that's normally okay. But you would want to know if there's a security system and locks and all the rest of that stuff. We talked about snow loads and why the roof may or may not have been replaced at some time. When was the water heater replaced? People's furnaces go out at all different times, but they typically last about 20 years. If it's not used all that often, it can go further. But their furnace may be, essentially at end of life, which is, anywhere $4, $5, $6, $7, $8,000 to replace. So it's not a cheap expenditure. And then no solar panels on the property. Lots of places get sun that you wouldn't think of. And especially here, seems like it wouldn't be the world's worst thing to go get them.
So Todd, given what you know about the area, yay, nay, somewhere in between?
Yay. That's an all yay, because I live in the area. I'm driving around. Of course, I'm an insurance nerd. I know about ice dams and all those things. And I'm driving down the street going, ice dam, ice dam, ice dam, ice dam. We've had a particularly rough February as far as snow and cold, and now it's warm. And my partner, who lives in New Jersey, who is an experienced home person, was a home inspector, worked with me at an insurance company, but he comes from Maryland. And I sent him PropertyLens. I said, what do you think of this for your house? And he goes, I wish I had known that part about the ice damming, because I would have purchased what they call a snow rake, roof rake.
Yeah, roof rake.
Yeah, roof rake. He did have water damming, and he got, the home was damaged. There was a lot of work and a lot of pain. And it was, replaced by the insurance company, but it was a very painful event that he never wants to repeat.
The best type of claim is the one you never have.
Bingo.
So you'll notice on the bottom here, there's a button that says print questions. So when you're shopping for a house, if you were to go look at this house, you can push this button and it'll give you a PDF that says, here's the questions you should ask. And then you go to the selling agent and you say, hey, answer this for me. Have you seen any of these issues? And this is how you get ahead of the game before you fall in love with the place. I mean, you walk in, you're like, oh, tra-la-la. But what about ice dams? What about the mechanicals? What about the roof? Tell me more about it. So that's the whole goal of this, is to inform the buyer before they get in too deep exactly what they're going to be looking at. Because, listen, you might live with it anyway because it's beautiful. It's a great location. It's near you. So, those are all good things about this place. So let's say you've already decided to buy the house. Then you go into what we call our inspector lens. And basically it takes the same data, but it reclassifies it to say, have the inspector check on this. When you get an inspection, a lot of times the inspector is referred by one of the real estate agents. Now, technically, they work for you. I didn't even know that. I bought like 6 houses. I didn't even know that. But the inspector wants to make sure that they're invited back for more inspections. So sometimes they soften some of the language that they see in a house. This is a list that you hand to them and say, make sure you check things out so we get the good inspection, not the easy inspection. So, we've seen that we've got some wind events here, so we want to check for shingles. Want to do a shingle check. Even though the roof data says it looks pretty good, you still want to do a check. You want to validate the age of the roof. It's in good condition, but it is, according to the data that we have, at the end of its useful lifespan. Now, again, we don't have building permits for this location, and that's a lot of times where that information will live. We don't have it for this location, so you want to check. You want to check about ice dams. You want to check about frozen pipes. Place has a basement. You want to look for water intrusion. You're close to the ocean here, and you're also fairly close to a flood zone here. So you want to make sure that you do a good job on the inspection and have that inspector do those things for you. Then we get to the insurance lens. And John, why don't you handle this part?
Here are the things that an insurer is going to take a look at. Property is 26 years old. Older properties cost more to insure. And so while it is new for New Hampshire, it's still old by an insurance standpoint.
I think that's something that we have to make a phrase. It's new for New Hampshire. So whenever something is like 35 years old, we're like, well, it's new for New Hampshire. I'm new for New Hampshire.
Yeah. Depends upon how old you are, I guess. Every baby, new for New Hampshire. The property has a high risk of experiencing crime. We saw that. Crime is typically not taken into account for homeowners policies, but certainly commercial policies. And then, roofs are expensive. And so every insurer wants to know about the roof because that's something that they end up replacing a lot of. So here's all the pieces and parts. We put that together. Further down, we actually even give an estimate of what it costs to insure.
So here, the magic number. This house has a replacement cost of $983,000. I know that's accurate because, Todd, you made it. Question is, are people insured properly for the replacement cost on their houses? What are you seeing when it comes to replacement cost and insurance levels? And how should a user look at this and say, like, does my Schedule A need to be $983,000? How does it all work from your perspective?
So a great question. And just I'll throw in that I'm new for New Hampshire, but my home is 200 years old. So I'm like typical for New Hampshire. And that's why this 30 thing is brand new compared to a lot of New Hampshire. But so the replacement cost, and this is an example where I think the market value was probably a couple times higher than the replacement cost. And so people tend to go to where the mortgage level is. They tend to go where the buy and sell value is. And in some cases, because if you go just around the corner from that house, it might be a few places that are reversed. So the sale value will be lower than the replacement cost value. And so we, as an industry, have done a pretty poor job of explaining what replacement cost is. I've only been doing it for 30 some odd years and I'm still trying. But it's a confusing thing for a lot of consumers, especially when we get into buying a home, because usually it's not really thought of insurance. I'm trying to qualify for a mortgage. I'm trying to get all the paperwork, whatever you need to prove you have the income. And then in the last minute, someone's going to say you need an insurance policy. And so just kind of with the inspector, the realtor, the bank, somebody might know an insurance person to call, and they're just trying to get the insurance at a mortgage amount if you're getting a mortgage to get that thing closed, where you really should be looking at it. Obviously, I do replacement costs, so I'm a little more leaning towards that end of it, but really understanding what's going on with coverage A, because coverage A or the replacement cost of the home dictates every other part of that policy.
So should your coverage A be at least the replacement cost for the property?
In my opinion, absolutely. Yep. At least the replacement cost, and not that the PropertyLens report isn't a great report or E2 value is a great report, but I would make sure that all the facts match up and it's the right square footage and all those things are known right at the beginning to make sure that that is a good number. I look for, just because it's me, I'm not giving insurance advice, but I look for policies that have 125% or 150% replacement cost or more, because, things change over time and you want to make sure you're fully protected. At least I think that way.
When you look at all of the requests that come in and things like that for replacement costs, what percentage of the U.S., houses in the U.S., are priced below their replacement costs?
Oh, yeah. So that's more of a phenomenon of, in between where properties, like if you're in between the coasts or you're, Midwest, it depends on the age of the property, and where the housing stock is. So I would say out of the United States, if you had to press me down 70% somewhere, the replacement cost value is going to be higher than the purchase value.
So a lot of people, when they go to insure their house, they go, well, I paid $250 for it, so I insure it for $250.
Right.
And
Yep.
then Then they start out thinking they're properly insured and they're underinsured from the beginning.
From the beginning, because again, it doesn't market value and replacement costs aren't really correlated in any way, because what you're buying, like this house is next to the ocean, it's next to the beach, as I mentioned. So it has a different market value than one maybe 5 miles further inland from it. And so the market value has very little to do with replacement costs, but your financial health, your financial impact of the loss has everything to do with replacement cost. And that's the part that, we spend a lot of time on. And, probably today, 60% of the United States or the homes in the United States are underinsured by at least 40%.
We have a neighbor in Minnesota where the house would cost far more to rebuild than the market value because the person who built it just built a crazy house. You know,
Yeah,
they built a castle basically, and to rebuild that, not only can you have trouble finding the right labor, that labor's expensive.
absolutely. And the thing of it is you don't necessarily, maybe they won't put back that castle next time, right? Maybe they're like, that wasn't paying. I don't want to do that again. But you have a certain investment in it. And I think as long as the parameters are explained to the consumer properly, like, look, this is what you have at stake. This is what's going to impact your finances. You knowing your finances can make the right decision about what coverage level to choose.
So now we get into the data itself. This next section is features in construction. This is the sort of thing that you'll see on a real estate website, or you can get from a bunch of different places. It's the year built, bedrooms, bathrooms. Is there a garage, parking spaces, etc., etc.? Is there an attic? There's not an attic, but there is a basement. Uh, Combination of real estate data from the MLS, but also from the county assessor. So lots of um, data. You are 760 feet from the coast. And while we didn't flag that, and probably should, there are some insurance companies who have a restriction where they won't write within a certain distance of the coast. So that's an insurance flag. Make sure that you can get insurance for this type of a property because you are close to the coast. Electric heating, central air. Um, it's on public sewer, which is always lovely. The roof is 3,100 square feet, and it's got a slight slope, and it's in Rye, which is in Rockingham County in the Rye School District. Okay, so here we go. The most recent listing, it was listed for a lot more than the replacement cost for sure. So my guess is that if you're using this number as your trigger for insurance, that you will be in an okay shape in case you need to replace it.
Yeah, I think, but the other part of what you said there is, I think also for the location, I'm not so sure any admitted carriers right in that location, and that will also impact the number that somebody chooses up there. So if you go to market at 2.9 million in a non-admitted area, you might be in for a surprise in the insurance cost.
Yep, for sure. There's no HOA. Um, okay, so we saw that this property last sold in June of 24. Now, what's interesting is that this house was on the market for a long time. It went up at 2.9 million in September of 23 and sold for 2.4 million in July of 24, which is a fairly hefty discount off of where it was. Then again, it's the first time it was listed since it was built. Taxes have been fairly level throughout the life of the property. The last year we have is 2022. Do you know when does New Hampshire reassess taxes? Is it on the sale that they give you a new tax, or they just come through every year and do a little something?
Well, it's like every 7, I think they do a revaluation, but it's based on the market value, and I think they take like 80% or 85% of the market value.
Okay. So that may be a shift in the tax base. But if you look at the pictures, it's a lovely home. These grounds are incredible. You are close to the ocean. You have an ocean view. Yeah, you like the tile, all that good stuff. A very late 90s construction. And then we get into the roof.
So we look at information from our aerial provider and how the condition of the roof looks, how old the house is. what permits have been pulled. Is there any indication in the MLS write-up that it's a newer roof? So there's lots of different pieces and parts that come into this. And then, if we can tell you exactly how old it is, we will, based on any of those sources. If not, then we look at how old the structure is and does the material last that long? So we know for every state how long a shingle roof lasts, how long metal, how concrete tile, membrane. So we know the types of roofing materials, how long they last on a state basis, and then whether or not it's within range. So given that a roof span right here for shingles in Maine or New Hampshire is 26 years, you've got 0 years left on this roof, but it looks to be in great shape. So it's probably a question that you're going to want to ask. How old is the roof? When was it last done? Since this person, it was the first time it was sold. They're the original owner. They should have an idea of when it was done. Now, they may have done it themselves, which is why a permit wasn't pulled. Some places have different cost levels that require a permit or not. So, basically every place requires a permit, but the permit conditions themselves vary greatly from place to place.
So this is the basic information about the roof. And then we give you a condition of the roof and an exposure risk for that roof. So we show this roof's in pretty good, it looks like it's in pretty good condition from the imagery. Now, the imagery was taken in April of 2024, so that may have been updated. It's 3,100 feet of roof. It's a 2-story house. It's a shingle roof in the hip formation, and it doesn't have a lot of staining at all. So it looks like it's in pretty good shape, but there is exposure risk. In New Hampshire, you're next to the ocean. You get wintertime risks, you get wind risks from that proximity to New Hampshire and to the water. So there's all sorts of things that could go wrong. So the sore thumb that is sticking out here is kind of need to check exactly what's going on with this roof. But I also think that the listing agent kind of blew it here, because the listing agent, if you replace the roof in the last 3 years, you should just say roof replaced in 2019 or whatever it happens to be. Put it in the listing, because that way all these automated systems can pick it up and eliminate this question as a risk for a potential buyer.
I will add, this is New Hampshire. The license plate says live free or die. So we don't need those stinking permits. You understand?
Yeah.
If you're replacing the roof, you don't need those stinking permits here.
Arr.
But I listen, I applaud you guys because as a carpenter and, background and being from New England, everything you're saying is music to my ears, because it's just such an important part of keeping your house together. It starts with that roof, and and you didn't say it, Bob, I thought you're going to throw it in, or John, but we get nor'easters. And so that's right where the nor'easter is. And they love to rip shingles off a roof when those winds come in. So that's why I think it's a hugely important thing. And I kind of echo your thoughts and why you wouldn't want to brag about having a new roof on a house.
Chances are, if you don't know the condition of your roof, your insurance company's going to figure it out pretty quickly. My sister lives up on the New Hampshire border, and they're flying drones over her house all the time. And if a couple of shingles are out of place, they'll send her a cancellation notice. I'm like, come on, what are you doing? It's like, but that's how aggressive insurance companies are getting using this imagery to help judge the quality of your roof. And you need to be aware of that before you plunk down all this money. Now, listen, $25,000 to repair a roof might be short dollars for you, in which case, congratulations. But better to know it up front than to not know it.
Damaging events. Well, we saw that there were 5 wind events. There's still 5 wind events. Here's the dates that they occurred. Wind speed 65 miles per hour or greater. So, that's just, and if this is actually a fairly short list for some of the properties that we've seen, where they just go on and on and on and on. So not a lot to get worried about. Not a lot of convective storms, things like that in the area. Just, given that there's a preponderance of winterish winds, those are the nor'easters. And so, as Todd stated, you get them.
We also track things like Has there been a fire at the property? Has it been involved in a prior disaster? We have about 3.5 million locations where something has happened at a property. And this hasn't, which is great. It's a little bit more of a clean bill of health. And then if you want to go in and look at imagery, you can see historical imagery. We've got 2020, 2018, and 2024. So here's the roof. Here's how it looked. It looks like it looked colorful, and now it's less colorful. We go to 2020, same thing, lots of trees, and then we've got the wintertime in 2024. The roof is the most critical. The roof and the basement are the two most critical pieces of your home, and you need to understand that before you go in. Now, unfortunately, we do not have permits for this area, and that may be for one of two reasons. The first is that the location doesn't publish them, which happens, or they publish them in a format that we can't read, which also happens sometimes. They'll put like a CSV up on their website somewhere, and we have to go and manually pull those down. So we don't have them for this location, and we check two different sources for permits. Homeowner service is a future deliverable, as well as property inspections. We can look at the estimated utility cost for this location, as well as solar cost savings. So, electricity cost in this area is pretty expensive, and especially in the wintertime, you're going to have some pretty steep bills, more in the winter than in the summertime. Eversource is the provider for this area, and average estimated consumption is about $450 a month for this location. If you want to get a solar system, you can click on there. Some people like them, some people don't. It's about a 7.5-year payback with federal incentives for that location. We have the carbon footprint for the utility. This utility is mostly nuclear, which is the Seabrook, I believe, nuclear facility. A little bit of coal, and then some of the greener ones. Okay, now we get to risks. John.
Well, as we discovered, there's winter risk. A little bit of pollution that can come in the form of radon as well as man-made. We'll see that a little bit further down. And then the rest of it is just average. Not going to be overly concerned about any of that. Not likely to get a hurricane. Not likely to fall in a sinkhole, and almost impossible to get a tornado. That's because you lack convective storms. So, when looking at this location, other than the winter risk, not really a lot to be concerned about.
Then we get to the next risk, which we have is flood. So it's not in a 100-year flood zone or a 500-year flood zone, but look where the 100-year flood zone is. It's in the backyard. And your neighbor's house is in the flood zone. Now, the problem that we have is that water doesn't respect these boundaries. It just goes where it wants to go, especially when you're living on a thing called Sea Road and Ocean Boulevard. Chances are there's going to be some water there. So you don't have to have flood insurance on this location, but you may want to get it. You're 59 feet away from the nearest 100-year flood zone, and you're 4 feet above that zone. The sea will have to rise 8 feet in order for sea level rise to be impacting this property, which is a lot. Then we get to weather. Winter. Ice dams, frozen pipes, roof snow. Get that snow rake for sure, or have a service that comes and does it for you. And everything else is fairly moderate. So, storm surge. We do have a high risk of storm surge here, which is probably what that flood zone is a reflection of the storm surge risk. Hurricane Bob was the last big hurricane that was in this area, and can cause some nasty problems with surge. Okay. John, environmental pollutions.
We got mold. We've got a nearby nuclear site. A little bit of radon risk. So this would be something that you definitely want to get tested when you were buying the house. And if it showed up like, yeah, it's here, you would definitely want the seller to put in a mediation system. And because it's got a basement, that is certainly a concern. Otherwise, pretty clean. No major risk of termites, minor, you're not near an asbestos source. So it's, and everything else is just non-existent. So very solid from that standpoint.
Yep, Seabrook's the power plant, 7 miles away. Now, some people are very comfortable living near a nuclear plant. Other people are less comfortable. It's your call, but at least you know where it is. And again, a lot of blanks on here because there's not a lot. There's no toxic release facilities or formerly clandestine drug labs or Superfund sites, which is great. Great bill of health. So then we get into insurability and claims. And what we do is we take this data and we run it through the admitted market, which may not be a factor here because it's so close to the shore. And we would expect this premium to be between $2,200 and $3,900 a year. But since it's so close to the shore, you're probably going to want to check with a replacement cost of about $983,000. There is a little bit of crime risk, a little bit of hail, very moderate risk of wildfire. The wildfires in New Hampshire tend to be very small and controlled. And then here's more information about the property. If you want, you can go get a quote from our friends at Progressive in this case. We don't have any claims on this property, not because there haven't been any, but because we don't have any. And then finally, we get into the neighborhood section. And John, why don't you walk us through this?
Sure. So neighborhood crime scores, like I said, something bad could happen last year. It's reflected in this year's crime scores. They're very variable. But if this is also a tourist type area, you've got a lot of activity going on, people moving in transient, you'll get these types of events. So you've got burglary, forcible robbery. Both of those, you'll want an alarm system on the house. Motor vehicle theft, park in the garage. Murder is average. Understand that the U.S. is a relatively safe country, so that's, average is okay. You don't typically want to bring home a C on the report card, but in this case, it's all right. And then less likely for forcible rape. Probably no high schools or colleges around. That's where you see a lot of activity on that type of spectrum. And then as you scroll down, there are no reported sex offenders that are registered within a half-mile radius. So if you're looking to, have a family move in, probably not a bad choice. Looks like it's safe for that.
And it is in a beach community. That's where you see a lot of this type of activity, like you said, John. It's like, and people say, "Well, do you mean my neighborhood's dangerous?" My neighborhood's not dangerous. Well, down here where the bars are is where a lot of this stuff occurs. It's got about average fire protection. It's got a hydrant nearby, less than 250 feet. It's got 9 hydrants within 1,000 feet, 5 stations within 5 miles. But it looks like this fire station is probably a blended fire station, which means that it's staffed during the day, usually staff volunteer at night. And that impacts your insurance. Those are more expensive to insure than a full-time 24-hour type of station. Nearest police station is close. Nearest hospitals are pretty close. And then finally, we get the property timeline, which is where we take all this data and lay it out into a timeline so you can see exactly what happened at which time. And they not only bought this property, they placed it in a trust when they bought it. We don't display who owns it. We have the data, but we don't display it. So you can see there's the timeline for what we have. And that, gentlemen, is 15 C Road in Rye, New Hampshire. Based upon everything that you've seen here, what would be the 3 things that you would look for at this property?
So my top 3 things are, I look for, through my case, because of what I'm knowing, but where it's sitting, I'm looking for flood. I'm looking for winter. Does it have a good roof structure? Whether I had this report or not, I would do that. And I'm going to look where I can get the service that's going to come rake my roof, because you need it. And there are plenty of services to do. You don't have to own your own roof rake for that. And then in your case, the proximity to the nuclear power plant is of interest to me.
All right, John, you're thinking about buying this house. What are you looking for when you walk in the door?
Well, the first thing I'm looking for is updated information on the road. How old is it really? Because if it is really 26 years old, I'm about to have to replace the roof, and that was like $28,000. I either want to negotiate that away, or I want to, understand that I'm going to have that expense relatively soon. Same is true for the furnace, the HVAC system, as well as the water heater. Because water heater, I'm probably on water heater number 2, maybe number 3. If it's number 3, yay, great, because that means it's relatively new. If it's number 2, I'm probably going to have to replace it. And if we're still on furnace number 1, that's coming up for replacement. So there's a lot of cost along those lines. And same is true for the windows on the property, because those are also 29 years old. And windows last 30 to 40 years. So, depending upon how long I'm staying and if anything's been done, that could be, if the place has 40 windows at $1,500 a window, there's a $60,000 expense that I wasn't counting on. So I'd want to look at all of those. Second thing I would look at is the ice dams, right? Has there been previous ice dam problems? Has it frozen? Has it, is there stuff that send up the person into the attic? We know mold grows there. And now, if you've got an ice dam, that's just feeding the mold. And then the third thing that I would be concerned about is radon, even though it's a C, not a D, because I do have a basement. Is there a mitigation system? Let's get it tested. Do I need to have a mitigation system? Because it's the number 2 cause of lung cancer in the U.S. Those would be all of the things and the associated costs that I'd be looking for.
If I were looking at 15 C Road in Rye, New Hampshire, here's what I'd be looking for. The pictures tell me that this house looks like it's original construction. All of the internals look like their original construction, which would lead me to 2 things. Number 1, is the roof original or has it been replaced or repaired? Since we don't know, it's the first question we would ask. It is the single most important aspect of a home. And if it's not been replaced, I would ask for a credit for the amount to replace it, because I'm going to be replacing it sooner rather than later. The second thing I would look at, because it looks like original construction, and there's a flood zone 50 feet away, I would look for water intrusion into the basement. Have there been any issues with the basement and water coming into the basement? Because that is the second most important part of your house, is the foundation. And then the third thing I would look for is, have there been any building permits pulled for this location? Because Rye doesn't share them, or we can't get them. So have there been any? Maybe they don't need any, but have there any work? Is it documented? So, but then the last thing I forgot, there's 4, is what's going to be the cost of insurance? I'm very close to the shoreline here. So it's going to be probably not admitted market. State Farm's probably not going to insure this. It's going to be some Lloyd's or some MGA company that will more probably insure this than not. So get that question answered up front. Get an insurance quote right away, because the benefit of getting the insurance quote is you'll be able to see, they can pull the claim data. You'll be able to see whether there are any claims on the property as well. So those are the 3/4 things I would look for. But otherwise, it looks like a nice location. You see if you like the ocean, if you like that kind of thing, it's beautiful. And, it did sit on the market for a while. So that's another thing I might take a look at, is what was up with that? Why was it? But it's not for sale right now, so we don't have to worry about that question. All right. So Todd, I did want to ask you one question about replacement costs. It seems like they're skyrocketing. Is that still going on? Is that true? Is it just sort of cherry picking observations? What's your take on the change in replacement costs?
Well, it's been dramatic. I mean, there was a huge change after COVID, because a lot of times what people said, I don't care what it costs. When they go buy a car, they go buy the house, they go talk to the bill, I don't care what it costs. And they never mean it. Well, after COVID, they had lots of money, nothing to do. They didn't mean it. And so the market shifted a great deal. And this is all over the USA. demographically, places change because people moved, because, work from a further location, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's just only so many electricians, so many plumbers, so many people to put things together. That's really the bottleneck. You can make more shingles, you can make more lumber, et cetera. But really the ability to charge more money came into the contractor's world. They could charge more. I happen to live not too far from this home. I can't get a contractor. You could put a giant pile of money in the middle of your kitchen floor and say, just come over. And every time you come over, you can grab money out of this big pile. They're still not coming over. And so that is increasing the costs. People talk about the LA fires, and from the insurance perspective, what's that going to do to the replacement cost? And realistically, not huge amount, because it's under 22,000 structures, which sounds like a lot of structures. When you live there, it's a lot. It's an impactful thing for where those folks live. But, from a country that builds 2+ million structures a year, 20,000 is not a huge piece of it. But then, and depending on where you fall in this process, we're not sure what we're going to do with tariffs. We get a lot of lumber out of Canada. We got a lot of building materials out of Canada, and laborers from different parts of the world. And there's a little bit of upset in that process. So our prediction is this year and next year, everything else being equal, because things can change daily. Everything else being equal, probably is another 6-7%, 8% bump this year, the same bump in the years behind. So if you go back to 2020 to 2 years from now, you're pretty close to 100% price change. So if your policy was $250,000 of coverage in 2020, am I telling you it should be $500,000 now? Yes.
Wow. Doubling.
Double, yeah.
All right. Well, Todd, any parting thoughts?
Well, I want you two to come with me when I go look at a house, because obviously I forgot the 3 most important things, but you guys are like, bam, bam, bam. But I guess what I'll do is I'll buy a PropertyLens report instead. But no, it's awesome though. This is good. And I want to make sure we throw the phrase out there. It's new for New Hampshire.
Yes. This is new. We're all new for New Hampshire. Yeah, my house is 200 years old there, mister. Oh, wait, that's more Maine. Sorry. Anyway,
Yes.
for this week's episode of Property of the Week, I want to thank our guest, Todd Rissel, CEO of E2Value. So for this week's episode, that's a wrap. Once again, I am Bob Frady.
I'm John Sigman.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks.